everyone. My name is Zara Trott, and currently I attend the Bermuda College. And welcome to The Ripple Effect. Today I am joined by my co-host, Tarai Trott, for today's discussion, who is a student at Cedar Bridge Academy.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tarai Trott. I will be giving you a little definition of bird diversity. Bird diversity is the variety of birds that congregate in Bermuda or just like live here or migrate here, such as the coho, which was a native Bermuda bird, and the longtail, which is also a native Bermuda bird, I believe. They nourish the environment with their droppings, and they also bring in a lot of other plant diversity through their droppings, like seeds that will eventually become trees and other plants.
As we celebrate National Bird Day this January, it's a perfect time to highlight Bermuda's incredible bird biodiversity, from the iconic longtails that we have to our native coho, who are vital to the island's ecosystem. Let's fly and explore how we can protect these important species and the habitats they rely on. Today we are joined by Ms. Janice Hetzel, who is a current president of the Bermuda Audubon Society. She's a keen birdwatcher and fierce advocate for the protection of Bermuda's unique natural environments. She had graduated with a BA in Science and Public Policy from Cornell University. She then worked on marine policy issues at the Natural Resources Defense Council. My apologies. An American environmental advocacy group. This was followed by a position at Chesapeake Biological Lab in rural Maryland, where she also volunteered with the local fire department as a firefighter and rescue squad member. This experience has switched her focus from nature to people. She then went on to receive a medical degree from George Washington University and completed her residency in family medicine. She then practiced in Bermuda as a family doctor and is now retired. Janice enjoys spending her time with family, friends, puttering her vegetable garden, organic of course, and sharing her love of nature with others. Welcome, Ms. Hetzel.
Thank you.
We are also joined today by Dr. Miguel Mejas, a Bermudian
Ornithologist.
Ornithologist, thank you.
Okay.
Naturalist and conservationist. He began as an apprentice to Dr. David Wingate, who inspired him to pursue a career in ornithology?
Yeah, nailed it.
Okay, yes. And conservation, particularly in Bermuda. As a part of his MC, Master's in Science?
Yeah, that's it.
Research, he used tiny geomarkers to chart the wintering whereabouts of post-breeding white-tailed tropic birds. You're going to need to help me with that.
That's all good. Oh, longtails.
His doctoral work shifted to songbirds, where he studied the singing and breeding behavior of Bermuda white-eyed vireo?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Or a chick of the village. He was awarded both his Master's in Science and PhD from Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. He currently serves as a committee member on both Bermuda Audubon Society and the Bermuda Zoological Society Trunk Island Living Classroom through the Bermuda Zoological Society. Welcome, Doctor.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Dr. Mejas, what can be done to protect the endangered and/or endemic bird species like the coho and the longtail, and how are these protections enforced?
Yeah, so great question. So thanks for having me again. So since human settlement, Bermuda has been drastically changed, right? So when the settlers came to Bermuda, they brought with them a plethora of mammalian and plant species to the island that drastically changed what pre-colonial Bermuda was like. So many of our native and endemic species, not just birds, like animals, plants, I'm talking like snails and lizards, birds of course too, they were outcompeted by all these different species. So fast forward to the present, essentially government has all sorts of laws that help protect some of these our most threatened species that we have, because we know for a fact that we've lost a lot of them because of extinction. So I know like David Wingate, for example, he went rummaging in the caves and he discovered the bones of birds that they used to be in Bermuda, but they no longer exist. So we know extinction has happened in Bermuda. So to prevent further extinctions, the government has enforced different policies to help, reduce that. So things like the Protect the Birds Act of 1975, which protects all birds in Bermuda, except like farmyard birds, domesticated birds, birds that are like flown in here through, like in captivity and raised as pets. It doesn't include the aquarium, museum, and zoos animals as well. And of course, certain resident birds that are considered invasive, which are all introduced. So we have like the great kiskadee, which eat like our Bermuda skinks and transport invasive plants all across the island. The American crow, another invasive species that we brought to Bermuda. That's a released, it was brought in as a pet, flew out of the cage, and now all the crows today are descendants of those individuals that escaped. The house sparrow, brought here to control fruit flies, which is funny because they don't really eat fruit flies, and things like that. So those pests aren't, and the starling as well, probably one of the worst. They compete with our bluebirds. So if you have bluebird boxes, starlings are an absolute nightmare because they're cavity nesting birds. So these are birds that we brought to Bermuda, and they just outcompete and disrupt the behavior of our native and endemic birds. So the legislations basically allow protection for these species. So we go out and we identify specific habitats that are important for them. So for example, the longtail and the cahal, those are coastal nesting birds. And so these different acts, like the Birds Protection Act, and another one is the Protected Species Act of 2003. That's like the most powerful piece of legislation we have in Bermuda that protects all of our most threatened species. So basically that act outlines guidelines. So we have to go out, members of the government have to go out, identify the habitats that are important for the animals, and then they establish nature reserves. And by establishing a nature reserve, you prevent that piece of land that's important for that animal from being developed. And you also control all the invasive animals that we brought, like the rats, cats, mostly the rats. We use like poison bait boxes, live traps to catch them on those nature reserves and things like that. So just to summarize, there's a lot of legislations in Bermuda that outlines different steps that we can take to mitigate threats that face our most sensitive bird species.
A question for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So based off of that, how long exactly would it take to create a nature reserve?
That's a good question. I know Janice could definitely speak on this as well because she has more experience with this sort of aspect than I do, but it all depends. If the property if it's privately owned, so the government, when they may have to approach the landowner and they may have to discuss, you've got this rare species in your property, so what will a nature reserve entail? What will it look like? Because when you establish a nature reserve, then that's going to change things like how rarely accessible is that property to the members of the public. So for example, the Castle Harbor Islands, that's the only place in Bermuda where the Bermuda petrel, the cahal, nests. It's endemic to Bermuda, meaning it's found nowhere else on the planet. So all those islands, when the petrel was rediscovered in 1951 on those islands out there, I don't know exactly when it was established as a nature reserve, but when it was established, essentially all those little islands in the Castle Harbor Nature Reserve are completely off limits to members of the public. So, but then you have other nature reserves like Spittle Pond, where it's still a nature reserve, but people can go. So it all depends on, what species is living there. So again, government will assess Bermuda petrel, we thought it was extinct for over 300 years. Oh my God, there's only 18 pairs of these birds left on the planet, and it's only found in Bermuda, and they're only on these little rocks. Okay, yeah, we definitely have to put in law to make sure nobody can go on these islands except for government personnel and trained scientists who know, what they're doing with the petrel. So yeah, I don't quite remember how long it took, but I know it varies depending on if it's privately owned or if it's already government property, then it probably happens fairly quickly.
Alrighty then. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no problem.
We'll be right back after a short break.
And we're back. I have a question for Ms. Hetzel. What are some of the biggest challenges Bermuda birds have faced, and what programs do you know that have tried to counteract that or have succeeded in counteracting some of the problems.
Right. So there's, could look at the birds in Bermuda maybe in different categories. So we have a large population of migratory birds that come through Bermuda every year. So up to 200 species sometimes come through and visit Bermuda on their way south or on their way north. Some of those stay through the winter, and some of them just stop for a day, a week, a couple of weeks, and then move on. And then we have the birds that are, living here year-round. So the ones that are here year-round, each group faces different challenges. Kind of overall, the biggest challenge, some of the bigger challenges for birds here and worldwide, one is habitat loss. So, every place is being developed more and more, so there's less open space and habitat for the birds. The other big issue with birds, again, here and worldwide, are cats. So cats are voracious hunters of birds and the cause of a lot of bird deaths, again, worldwide. And other things such as windows. Birds will strike windows, particularly in migration time, so those are some of the things that, birds are faced with as a challenge. Also, because as Miguel had said earlier, we have these other introduced species, and they can also cause a big problem for the survival of birds. So say one program that we have at the Audubon Society is to produce and promote and sell and educate people about bluebirds and bluebird boxes. So the bluebird is, because of the introduced species, has no natural habitat. It's a nest cavity nester. And so it now is completely reliant on the boxes that we make to survive. So they used to be in holes in cedar trees. We don't have as many cedar trees, and the other birds chase them out, and they aren't able to go in there. So the program for the bluebird boxes, which we promote, is to help create a habitat, a nesting habitat for those birds where they will be safe and able to reproduce and continue to live in Bermuda. As an example of other programs that we may have are, Audubon has 20 nature reserves, again, protecting habitat, so that's separate from the nature reserves that are run and managed by government. So we're protecting habitat, not only for the birds, but for all the other wildlife and species that we have out there, as well as for the enjoyment of people to be out in nature, which is really important as well. And some of those reserves are fenced so that they are just for the animals and the nature, and then some of them have public access. So it's a bit of a balance in both.
A question pertaining to that. As Bermuda is an ever-growing metropolitan city, in regard to habitat loss, what would be your biggest suggestion for assistance in that area?
Good question. I think there's a number of different ways that we can try and slow down the habitat loss, and it starts with our own backyards. So being aware of how important it is to provide habitat, even if we have a tiny, tiny yard, by planting native endemic trees. There's a new booklet that came out this year that David Wingate and Lisa Green created, Practical Guide to Garden Management in Bermuda, or something like that, which talks about how you can remove invasive species in your backyard and which plants to plant and how to plant them. It's really kind of just a hands-on, nitty-gritty how to do it, which everybody should have in their house to look at. And but just by making small changes in your own personal space is one. Two is having more awareness of people who may be developing bigger lots of land for their houses. So to minimize the hard surfacing, to plant native and endemic and bird-friendly, nature-friendly landscaping, and not use, some people are still using what we would consider invasive plants in their manicured gardens. And there's no need for those. We can just use things that are either native or endemic, or things that are not invasive, that may grow here and look pretty, but they're not going to cause a problem with the rest of the habitat that's out there. And then it extends into looking to have government policies that are better protecting of the woodlands and habitats and nature and open spaces that we have. And then I guess further, it's interesting because I think when you talk about that, I think about land, what trees, parks, and bird habitat is quite interesting because it's not It's not just the woods. I mean, golf courses are great bird habitats. Garbage dumps are great bird habitats. We go to some pretty weird places bird watching. Cross Island provides a very specific habitat, and sometimes, you can go out there and see endangered piping plovers, in places that you wouldn't expect. Beaches, and then further out, the oceans, the rocks, small rock islands that we have. So it extends far and wide, and being aware of how much there is and how important it is to protect it.
Okay.
Makes a big difference.
Noted, I'll look for sparrows in my garbage. Nice. Great. Taraz?
Yes, I also wanted to ask, what made you guys choose your path in life? Like, what made you guys want to go down the path to protect avial life, like birds and stuff?
Yeah, so for myself, I actually started off with an interest in marine science. So I wanted to be a marine ecologist when I was a kid. And so I practically grew up at the aquarium. So my parents used to take me there when I was like 10, 11. And by the time I was like 13, 14, I was actually volunteering. So I was probably like one of the youngest aquarium volunteers on record, because I was I think the legal age was like, 15 and 16, but I was so adamant that the aquarium was like, all right, we'll take him. We'll give him a chaperone, but we'll take him. And and so I spent all my early teens and my 20s at the aquarium. So I tried learning how to dive. So I went to like triangle diving. The aquarium paid for the course, which was really cool. And I learned pretty quickly though that I couldn't dive. I couldn't equalize my ears. So I had like sinus issues. So when I was like 22, I was like, crap, I can't be the marine scientist that I wanted to be because I can't even descend like 6 feet down into the water column. So anyway, I met my neighbor. I was introduced to my neighbor, David Wingate, around 22. And it's ironic because he was literally my neighbor, but my friend at the time was working closely with him, and he was to cheer me up because I was pretty sad that I couldn't be a marine scientist. So he introduced me to David, and he took me out bird watching, and I joined him on some of his like field expeditions. And at the time, David was working on these birds called the common tern. From Bermuda, they're critically endangered. So at the moment in 2024, there are only 10 birds that make up the whole population. They're seabirds. So they look like a seagull, but they're like have a black cap, red bill, gray with forked tails, and they nest on these little rocky islets that Janice was talking about, all inshore. And they're very aggressive. So if you step on these islands, they attack you in the head. So when my hair was buzzed down like this, when they would hit me, they would actually draw blood. And I remember like my first day out with David, I dodged this bird's bill because they're screaming and they're pooing on you midair, they're coming at you, and I dodged it and I like smashed my face on like a rock pinnacle on the ground. Okay. And David got a kick out of it because he said, you did way more damage to yourself than that bird ever could. But I fell in love with that. I fell in love with like being out in the field, studying these interesting birds, and and David opened my eyes to, like what Janice was saying, we get about 200 species of birds that come to Bermuda, and some of which breed locally. And these terns, they suffered a lot because of climate change. So they basically have this breeding system where the eggs will hatch like May and June. So both the male and the female are looking after these eggs. And again, there's like small, there's little rocky islets. They're just like small little islands and like bays and harbors. That's what they nest on. They're just ground nesting birds. They're not cavity nesting birds like longtails or cahals. They just put some leaves and sticks on the ground and they lay their eggs and that's it. So anyway, hurricanes come, right? So September, October. So around that time when the chicks can fly, which takes about a month, all the females leave Bermuda. They go down south to South America to spend the winter. They leave the males behind to look after the young in Bermuda in the middle of hurricane season. So if we have a really bad hurricane that year, the hurricanes will kill all the chicks and all the male common terns of that season. So I remember I went to Cedar Bridge, like you, in 2003, Hurricane Fabian. Before I was even into birds, unbeknownst to me, that hurricane killed all the males and all the chicks for that our tern population. So it went down from like 30 pairs down to about like 18. So the following year, 2004, all the females that left Bermuda early came back. And there were no males. So the females started pairing together, and they had these same-sex pairs, and they were laying these oversized infertile clutches. And because there were no males to fertilize the eggs, those eggs never hatched. So, and because of climate change, these hurricanes are more frequent and they're stronger. So and they are impacting our birds as well as the cahao, right? Because again, these are all coastal breeding seabirds. So yeah, unfortunately, I hate to report it, but right now, as of 2024, it's been a few years, and I haven't confirmed any male common terns in the Bermuda population. So it's possible that because of hurricanes and climate change, we've lost this bird as a breeding species in Bermuda. Next year will probably be the last year I would expect the male common tern to come back. But if they don't come back, then we're just going to have females coming every year, 10 of them, and they're just going to honeymoon in Bermuda until they die, eventually never producing young again. So it's kind of sad. But anyway, that's what got me into conservation.
Yeah,
that's a long-winded answer. Like, there's a lot of cool birds in Bermuda, and yeah, that's what got me into conservation with birds in Bermuda.
Definitely. Thank you for the explanation. And Ms. Hetzel, what brought you into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up, I was always interested in nature and environmental protection, not specifically birds, but in a general way. And then in Bermuda, we sometimes in the birding community, you talk about a spark bird. So there's like one bird that you find or you've been introduced to you, and it sucks you into this awareness of birds. So in my case, we had a spark bird. It's called a prairie warbler. It's a small migratory bird, and it has this very pretty song, which I'm not going to attempt to repeat. And these birds, actually, rarely do we hear them singing here because they're mostly seen in the fall when they're not singing. But this one came in the spring, and it was in my backyard, and it like sat on the back table, and it was very present, and we could hear it. So at the time, we called up Andrew Dobson, who was the head of the Audubon Society, and many people know him. He was a teacher at Warwick Academy, now retired. And said, "We've got this bird in our backyard." He said, "Really? It's not supposed to be here in June. It's usually gone by." He was all excited. So he came over to our house, and we got to see the bird and listen to it and learn about the bird. And that was my spark bird. And then from there, it just became more and more interested in what the birds are in Bermuda, and then more aware of the issues we face and what we can do to help protect them. And it went on from there.
Okay, thank you. So the beauty of them brought you more into it. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm more like you.
Yeah, my spark bird was a ringneck duck. Yeah, when David took me out birding, he took me to a golf course, and it was Tuckerstown Golf Course, and there's a little pond, and I got binoculars, and David's like, "Look at that!" And it was this beautiful black and white duck, which I'd never seen before, because before then I only knew mallards, the yellow bill, the green head.
Oh, I believe I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it was. I've seen one once, I believe. It's a really
Yeah.
different type of duck.
Yeah,
When you look at it. Like,
exactly.
You wouldn't expect it to be like a duck. You'd see it, but it's like I've never seen it.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like a duck?
It not really, but I feel like you'd be able to explain it.
Yeah, it's just a stark contrast to what you're used to, because when you hear duck, you instantly think of that classic, puddle duck with the green head, yellow bill, and but this duck was like black and white, and they dive too, which was even cooler. So David's like, yeah, there's like, hundreds of more species like that come to Bermuda, and I was like, really? And that's when I was like, oh, Bermuda's not that mug after all, it's got some cool things that come here. So yeah, ringneck duck was my spark bird.
Dang, mine's kind of boring. Mine's just a regular budgie.
Oh, okay, all right.
I like parrots, so I remember being really young, and I just saw like the flock in Australia for the first time, because I only knew them as like pet birds.
Right.
And then I saw a video of the flocks in Australia. It was like hundreds of these tiny little things, and the noise in it was disgustingly loud. But I just imagine remember being so fascinated and being like, I wonder what it would be like to see that in person.
Right.
And I was just like, dang, that would be so interesting. And especially because it's so tiny, but the flocks are huge.
Right.
So it's like, wow,
So,
birds. Weird interest, but okay.
Yeah, so in Bermuda, we do see them occasionally when we're out birding, budgies, like they are escaped pets here.
Mm-hmm.
They don't seem to be an issue for our environment, but they're funny to see. Like, you'll see, like, I remember once I was at this dairy farm bird watching 2 falls ago, and it was like a power line with all these house sparrows, and sandwiched between them literally was this green budgergar just like being squashed by these house sparrows trying to fit in. So you do see them around Bermuda as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. Try.
Last question, then I'll turn it over to Zara. Geez, I might have forgot it. Now, what's one of the rarest birds you might have seen when you're bird watching rarest bird. Like you wouldn't have expected to see that ever.
All right. Do you want to have first shot, Jim?
Go ahead.
Me? Oh gosh, what do I begin? So many crazy ones. Gosh. I mean, I've seen things like Arctic warbler, again, like tiny little bird, like it's green, and but that one was unusual because they're from like Alaska, and usually when they migrate, they stick to the west coast and like migrate straight down to like Central America, Mexico, But this bird somehow got his migration bearings mixed up and flew, southwest, southeast, across over to the Atlantic side and made it to Bermuda. And that was the first record, and who knows if that'll ever happen again. It probably will never happen again in our lifetime, The bald eagle was pretty cool 2 years ago. Did any of you guys see the bald eagle? Yeah? So the last time that bird was in Bermuda was like 1987. So I was like literally a newborn, right? So it was like, we're talking like 37 years. So so that was pretty cool. And that bird hung around for like a good year. It did attack some of our longtails. But we have so many longtails that one eagle barely put a dent in the longtail population. And it also did work. It ate a lot of feral pigeons, and it ate a lot of feral chickens as well. So that bird